when building a machine learning model and within the machine learning workflow, there's quite a lot of challenges and pain points, and we can kind of cover a few of them. Generally speaking, from working with some of the best companies in the world building machine learning models like Uber and Etsy and Zappos and Ancestry and many more, we find that the biggest challenge is actually building a model that is good enough. And when I say good enough, I'm typically referring to kind of meeting the business KPI or the product KPI. And we often hear in the industry that 80% of models never make it to production. And I think that stat is actually quite accurate. But from our experience, it's not because they couldn't productionize it or deploy it. It's typically because the model is not good enough. Now, I've spoken to thousands of machine learning teams, and I've yet to meet a team that had a model that was very good or good enough, and they couldn't figure out deployment. And I'm not saying deployment is easy or trivial. It's definitely not. But it's not as different from deploying an application. So typically, if you have an engineering team that knows how to do that, they can typically figure out deploying a model. Obviously, there's specific areas and use cases where that looks a little bit different. So, when we think about why is it so hard to build a machine learning model that meets the business KPI, there's multiple components to that, right? Starting from the very basic question of what model are you trying to build? So, in bigger enterprises, you typically have these two subgroups. You have the data scientists who are well aware of the limitations of machine learning, where does it shine and where it might not be able to provide value. And then you have the other group of the line of business owners that knows what's important for the business, but they are actually not aware of where ML might fit. And the businesses that we've seen that have been successful gaining business value from AI are the ones that found that intersection. And sometimes that intersection happens in one person's head, like the head of data science. We've definitely seen that. But on a larger scale, it typically means bringing both of these persona into kind of like the same room and having a conversation. So it starts by kind of correctly identifying the right business use case, making sure machine learning and data science is part of that process. But unfortunately, with machine learning and data science, we often don't know if we'll succeed beforehand, right? So unlike software engineering, where you have a lot of predictability, right? Like with most software projects, with enough time, with enough engineers, you'll be able to kind of build it. But with machine learning, unfortunately, it's a much more research-driven paradigm. So it operates very differently. So what we've seen have been very successful for these larger companies is to take a portfolio approach. So instead of identifying one problem, you actually try to identify a few depending on the size of your team. And then you start kind of experimenting and prototyping on all of them in parallel, right? And then the exciting thing is typically with machine learning, if there's signal in the data, you'll be able to see some results pretty quickly. There might not be good enough, but at least it tells you that it's worth pursuing this avenue. And some projects will fail from the get-go. And that just taking this portfolio approach allows you to, like, over time, decide to double down on just one instance or one problem and eventually build a model that's good enough and take it to production and bring real business value from AI.